Ready to go.
Greetings, I'm Salvador Cordova, and welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. Today's episode of the IDCS show is airing on what some people call Happy Darwin Day. I actually don't think it's a happy thing to celebrate. For some of us, we don't think Darwin had much to contribute to science or society. And in fact, I think what he represents has not been a positive thing for society. Anyway, this is a picture of Darwin, who doesn't look particularly happy in this photo. And I was just laughing. I think it was a photo like this, and they were saying Happy Darwin Day, and I just broke out laughing. So with that, Emory, I have the privilege and honor to have Emory Moynagh as my co-host. He is a graduate student in biology, as I consider myself also one. And so this is why I think when I have shows with him, it's particularly fun because we're kind of in the same boat and we study biology as serious students. And I think that's important. We witness to the world that we can be good students in biology and totally reject evolutionary biology. So with that, Emory, if you had some words to say.
Yeah, so if you want to celebrate something tomorrow on what is termed "quote unquote" Darwin Day, it's actually President Lincoln's birthday. So if you want to celebrate something, there you go. And I'm actually gonna tweak Sal here just a little bit because I actually think Darwin did make one positive contribution in the field of carnivorous plants. It had nothing to do with evolution, but he did make some positive contributions in the field of carnivorous plants.
Oh yeah,
so he did do something right, I guess. But
okay,
yes.
we could celebrate that. I'd like to applaud his contribution to our understanding of carnivorous plants.
Yes,
thank you.
Actually, there's a good possibility that Darwin's interest in carnivorous plants has had a lot to do with why they're so popular today. So, Darwin may have indirectly contributed to why people are so obsessed with carnivorous plants, but that's not why anybody celebrates him. If that had been all he'd done, nobody would have cared. So
there is something to celebrate on Valentine's Day. I don't know why this is airing on the 14th, I guess because it is a Sunday. And you could just see the love there on James Tour's face. There is this pretend professor named Dave on the internet. He's not, as far as I know, he is not a real professor. He's just a pretender. He has like 1 million subscribers on his channel where he teaches sciences. And this is airing on the 14th, and let's see what time, at 8 p.m. I'm presuming that's Eastern. It says, in this prologue episode, Dr. James Tour explains why he is addressing abiogenesis and common misconceptions in this series of lectures. After providing the outline for the course, Dr. Tour provides a sneak peek of the upcoming critique. And included there is Professor Dave apparently bashing James Tour. So this may be a reply. And by the way, Professor Tour is a real professor, both in chemistry and computer science. He has over 600 peer-reviewed publications. 600 is an enormous amount. He worked for Nobel Prize-winning chemist Richard Smalley, and kind of the backstory behind that, it was James Tour's witness that led Richard Smalley to the Christian faith and made a creationist out of Richard Smalley. That's just a little bit of a backstory. And so we just want to make that announcement. This could be a lot of fun, and if it could be a series, this could be a lot of fun.
And for anyone who's not heard James Tour speak, he does not speak like an academic. He's very interesting to listen to. He's not the typical dull, dry, boring academic that everybody thinks about. Tour is not just incredibly gifted in sciences, he's a very gifted communicator. So when he talks, he communicates important ideas, but he also communicates them clearly and understandably at a level that anybody can get. And by the way, he's criminally undersubscribed. He only has like, what, 13,000 subscribers? What, I don't know how this man only has 13,000 subscribers, but fix that, folks.
Oh my. Yeah. Well, to that end, oh, you see that big red button? That means I didn't subscribe yet. So there you go. I did my part. And yeah, Dr. Tour is from New York. And he has I'd say a New York attitude, and he wanted to be a state trooper. It just so happened he had color blindness and he didn't qualify. And I just think, yeah, he's got it. I could just imagine this guy pulling me over. He has that kind of attitude too. It's really fun. So, and in addition to that, on Logical Plausible Probables YouTube channel, and you could see the subscription, the YouTube channel name here. There's going to be an after show, and they're already predicting Professor Dave gets annihilated on abiogenesis. So maybe some of us will show up on that open mic, and there'll be a lot of love on this Valentine's Day as we just keep spiking the ball, just finally seeing who many of us perceive as a villain and pretender Dave finally getting his comeuppance.
Yeah, I will definitely be planning on joining that after show, Lord willing, if I can get there. And I'm sure that several other people will be joining it too. So definitely show up for that, because I get the feeling that now I from the description of the tour video, it sounds like this is kind of just an opening, and he's not going to dunk too hard on Professor Dave. So you may want to watch the whole series to get dunked to get the full dunking. But knowing Tor, he's not going to be able to. If and when, and this is not a if, it is a when, Dave says something that is less than intelligent, Tor's not going to take it lying down.
Yeah. By the way, Tor is a synthetic chemist. He's one of the most quoted, cited chemists. He's a very respected chemist, and he owns 7 companies. He started 7 companies. So he's a very accomplished individual. And Professor Dave couldn't have taken on a more qualified scientist. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that this will move forward the critiques of abiogenesis theory, and I think indirectly also the critiques of evolutionary theory. Speaking of which, on this, what some people call the Question Evolution Day, or I was even proposing to call it the Dismantling or Destroying Darwinism Day, we are going to talk about this peer-reviewed paper. Springer is a respected publisher. I think they are connected to the prestigious scientific journal Nature. We see Springer Nature as a publisher. And so this paper was in the journal Biology and Philosophy in 2017. And how did I find this? Every now and then I'll just Google an idea. I said, I'm going to Google evolutionary biology useless. And this is what I found. So if you're wondering, it's not like I combed through all these evolutionary biology papers. I think I try not to waste too much of my time on evolutionary biology. I want to study real science, like say cell biology, protein biology, structural biology. So with that, Emory, I'm volunteering him to perhaps we'll read a few paragraphs at a time.
Yeah, I am gonna skip over most of the abstract because it's just kind of telling us where we're going with the paper, and I want to get into the meat of the paper a little bit more. So we're just going to kind of skip over the abstract. Basically, the abstract just says, "Hey, there's a bunch of people that want to reform evolutionary biology. They think there's a bunch of problems with it, and the author does not agree. And the author thinks that these people are actually hindering evolutionary biology by saying that there are things wrong with it." So
I'll just skip over. Okay, so the paper is What's Wrong with Evolutionary Biology?
All right. So starting under the heading Discontent and Laundry Lists. A dispiriting thing about working in evolutionary biology is the steady stream of claims that the field needs urgent reform. Side note, it does. These critiques are too numerous to cite, but representatives include, and he lists a bunch of articles that you're going to link to this, right, Sal? So if people want to look those articles up, they can.
Yeah, yes. If you'll give me a moment, I really hate all these advertisements on the side. I'm going to try to download the PDF right now.
Okay. I'll keep reading while you figure that out. Yes. These critiques differ greatly from one another. Indeed, their conclusions range from undeniable. New concepts and empirical findings may eventually force a shift of emphasis to the more robust. It's wrong like phrenology is wrong. Every major tenet of it is wrong, according to Lynn Margulis, quoted in a paper from 1994. Side note, Lynn Margulis is not a lightweight.
Your microphone faded a bit there.
Oh, sorry about that. So just as a side note, when Lynn Margulis says that it's wrong like phrenology is wrong, every major tenet of it is wrong, Lynn Margulis isn't a lightweight. Lynn Margulis actually knows what she's talking about. So maybe sit up and pay attention. Reading on, nevertheless, there are some good reasons for considering the discontent as a whole. First, some of the critiques themselves recognize a shared enterprise with conferences or multi-authored volumes united solely by the participants' discontent with current practice. The result is often laundry lists of ideas or observations which the field is urged to incorporate or emphasize, but which have little or nothing in common with each other. The only certainty is that something needs to change. Second, irrespective of the content of the individual critiques, the sheer volume and persistence of the discontent must be telling us something important about evolutionary biology. Broadly speaking, there are two possibilities, both dispiriting. Either, one, the field is seriously deficient, but shows a peculiar conservatism and failure to embrace new ideas that are true, embrace ideas that are new, true, and very important. Or two, something about evolutionary biology makes it prone to the championing of ideas that are new but false or unimportant, or true and important but already well studied under a different branding. This article will argue for possibility too. Go ahead.
Can we pause?
Sure.
I can guess where you stand. Number one, the field is seriously deficient. Unfortunately, this article wouldn't have been published if someone actually argued for number one. The field is seriously deficient. And I don't know if you saw it, but there was a passing sentence later on, and that's just so you don't miss it, where it even almost rejected common ancestry. So I was just like, oh, what's the point of this?
Yeah.
So by all means, if go on, or unless you had any other comments.
No.
That was just too juicy.
Echo what you said, Sal. Like, possibility one. Like, let's just actually be open-minded to the possibility that possibility one is true. Unfortunately, this argue completely rejects possibility one, even as a possibility. But possibility one, the field being seriously deficient and a failure to embrace new ideas as a whole, that sounds an awful lot like evolutionary biology. Just, I mean, it took something like, 30, 40 years for them to embrace genetics after they discovered Mendel. I mean, they're not exactly known for jumping in at, new ideas that are true. They're more known for hanging on to old ones that are false.
Yes.
Haeckel's embryos.
Oh, goodness. And
I have a biology text from like 2011 that still has those in it.
Yeah, goodness. And I mean, if I can say by way of comparison, because I have studied, my other path in life was in the aerospace defense industry and studying physics. And we don't have complaints like this about electromagnetic theory or quantum mechanics, or even the approximations, which we know are approximations of Newtonian mechanics. We build buildings on Newtonian mechanics and classical mechanics. We're able to send spacecraft all around the solar system and even beyond with classical and Newtonian and celestial mechanics. We don't have crises like this in the fields of physics in the major disciplines that have been well established for hundreds of years. But evolutionary biology, by comparison, it just keeps coming up with these problems. And And just as a student of, now a transformed student of biology, I'm just like, okay, so when I have a question about math and I don't understand something, or physics or chemistry, I just ask it. And I get a straightforward explanation, or I usually do. With evolutionary biology, I just get ad hominems, just insults, and saying I don't understand. I'm just like, okay, either the field has failed, or I'm seeing something and they're covering it up. Because I was a good enough student in other disciplines, why is it this one, I'm being treated like I know nothing? So
those two possibilities are not mutually exclusive, Sal. Let's go ahead and move on here. It will being talked about the article, it will suggest that a few distinct and inescapable properties of evolutionary biology make the field highly likely to attract discontent, regardless of whether the criticisms have any merit. Okay, that sounds like a cop-out, but okay. The aims of the article are therefore limited in two major ways. First, to explain the volume of discontents, critiques will be painted with a broad brush to bring out some common features. This is not a substitute for engaging properly with any individual argument. Okay, I'm glad you acknowledge that. I'm glad he actually acknowledges that, because a lot of times critiques just get painted with a broad brush and then you can ignore the individual argument. So I appreciate him acknowledging that. Second, the article will ignore factors common to most of us in most academic subjects, such as self-promotion and quest for impact. As someone, Kitchener 2000 has argued, all scientific controversies entail the construction of career niches. The focus here is on the features that are peculiar to evolutionary biology. And then he starts going into the problems. Some of these problems are going to be very familiar to you, Sal. Some problems for evolutionary biology are caused by the basic characteristics of life. Living things evolved from one or a few.
Yes, that's what I was saying. What? Just a passing reference. I'm just like, when did this happen? It's like it's quietly being like, oh, it's no longer a single common ancestor. It's like, okay, so there's been quietly a change from a universal tree of life to like a few, and then now maybe pools, populations. I'm just
like, okay. I didn't even hear this in my evolution class. Like, wait, this is. At some point, though, and I think Rob Carter is the one who kind of turned me on to this. At some point, the evolutionary theory is going to look very, very much like creation with long ages, because the data is going to force them there. And when they get there, they're going to have a very hard time hanging on to their long ages, because there won't be any reason for them anymore. But they still will, because they don't want to accept God, but it's going to be tough for them. So, yeah. A few.
How about let's just a prediction. Let's see that number slowly creep up. And in one of our Nerds Grow clubbing sessions, when we were talking about eukaryotes, they're talking about populations. So it's like one or a few. Now it's maybe a population. We're just going to see this number expand.
Just maybe a couple populations, and maybe 2 or 3 species, and then it's just going to keep going up. It's just going to keep going up. At any rate, oh my, but are now characterized by their enormous abundance, variety, and complexity. Each is the result of historical processes involving contingencies of distinct kinds.
Oh, I love that word.
Sometimes including one-off events which might have been highly improbable, which had profound consequences.
Oh, highly improbable, distinct kinds. I really like the language so far. Yeah. I knew you were going to have fun on this paper.
I mean, he's essentially like throwing away most of evolutionary biology.
Yeah,
but okay.
I like the way he said characterized by their enormous abundance, variety, and complexity, distinct kinds, and highly improbable. I love it.
Keep it up. You keep climbing up that mountain of truth. You're gonna find out the creationists are at the top one of these days. Anyway, some banal practical problems are caused by the sheer scope of evolutionary biology. Nobody can hope to read enough of the relevant literature. Now that's true. That's actually true. The literature is so hyper specialized and so focused anymore. You have to specialize. You can't read enough to be an expert on everything. Which means that ideas rightly rejected in one subdiscipline can be rediscovered or warmed over in others. If the Drosophila people aren't impressed, then you can always try the clinical virologist or the vertebrate paleontologist or the biological anthropologist, etc. And also, it makes it almost inevitable that key terms will be used in importantly different ways, as with, and he gives a list: adaptation, conflict, environment, epigenetics, evolution, fitness, gene, group selection, heritability, phenotype, relatedness, selfish, species, etc.
Yes. And this is so fun because this is where they have acknowledged there's a problem with the definition of fitness. I mean, it really is it's a serious problem. And one thing they said, one cannot hope to read enough to build a theory. You know, it's very, just by way of comparison, the beauty of other scientific disciplines is, like, say, chemistry and physics. Some of the basic laws, you don't have to read all the literature to know that you can count on it.
No, you don't.
You have the hope that if you found something, it can be generalized to many things. And that's actually the power of a really good theory. Even when you don't know for sure if it's going to be generalized, other people will find out for you. That's not the case in this discipline. And that's why I've always looked at this with suspicion. I'm just like, you guys are just making generalizations. You have no experiments to prove it. Yep. And there's a lot of actually experiments that kind of make it doubtful. I'm just comparing and correct. It's actually been good for me to have been in another, studying an entire different scientific discipline and then being acquainted with evolutionary biology and just being horrified at the way that I see the discipline being conducted. So please go on. Thanks
and
for
just as a quick addition to that, like, you know, the fact that chemistry and physics and all these other things have hard and fast laws that apply almost all the time, and then you go to evolutionary biology and everything's a special case almost. I mean, the special cases out your ears, and it's like, okay, guys, maybe admittedly, biology is more complex to an extent than chemistry in that it runs on chemistry, but still, really, guys?
well, no, you make a very good point. You see, biology cannot be explained by simple laws. It has such a deep variety. Why even try to make an overarching theory? They're not even in a position that they can put forward a theory because they would have to account for all these special cases. And so even as a matter of principle, the whole enterprise is way too premature to be saying it's fact. Mm-hmm. And we saw an example of that just now where it said one or a few common ancestors. I'm like, okay, yeah, you know, you're starting, the field is starting to back down on some of their insisted dogma.
Yep. And the author goes on, by confusing these senses, and he's talking about the list of things we just read off, it's easy to make uncontroversial claims sound exciting. This may happen most often with the term random mutation. Second, new data appear at a very rapid rate, particularly in recent years for molecular biology. That's also true. This creates the misleading impression that new conceptual frameworks must also be required and that valid research programs are somehow out of date, leading, e.g., to behavioral ecologists feeling compelled to do metabolomics. Third, the scope means that the authors are drawn to criticize evolutionary biology when their interests and expertise lie elsewhere. This is often in some branch of human psychology, and philosophers of very different stripes have been accused of mischaracterizing the whole of evolutionary biology solely to bolster a theory of semantic content. The characteristics of life also make it easy, all too easy, to collect data whose implications seem revolutionary. This is true in two distinct ways. First of all, generalizations in biology from the color of swans to the misnamed central dogma have exceptions, and so will often be straightforward to make observations that contradict any well-established generalizations. Such observations may be truly novel without being, quote, important in any other sense. Second, it is straightforward to identify factors that have been little discussed in the biology literature, but which have had a major influence on the evolutionary outcomes in some lineage or lineages. Off the top of my head, quote, red things are common in many ecosystems and are little discussed as a class in the biological literature. However, removing red things, doubling their number, or changing their color would change the outcomes of evolution in many cases. In this sense, it is easy to show that red things are an important and neglected factor in evolution. Similar arguments could be made for gravity, burrowing, oxidative damage, noses, histone modification, etc. Is he seriously arguing that histone modification doesn't actually affect very much? Did he just... Did he just... Okay. I maybe you haven't read some of the papers on histone modification, but
or
okay.
the Nobel Prizes the Nobel Prizes awarded in association with this.
That's a little bit short. Like, I could see some of this other stuff. He's deliberately pulling out stuff he thinks is ridiculous. So okay, I get that. Some of this other stuff, knows is having an effect on evolution. Okay, not really, but histone modification. Okay.
Well, he's saying, I think what we could, I want to be charitable here. It says, so we could say red things are an important and neglected factor in evolution. So we could just say gravity is an important and neglected factor in evolution, or noses are, or histone
right,
modification.
But he's making a ridiculous comparison to show that it's how easy it is to say that something is a neglected factor in evolution. And one of the things he picked as his ridiculous comparison is histone modification.
I know that shouldn't. Well, you know what? No. There is actually there's a hint of truth in this, because if what some evolutionary biologists say is true, I reject it. They say that 90% of the human DNA is junk. Then histone modifications are an important and neglected factor. To a point,
genome's not junk. So
but to a related point that you're saying is they have all these exceptional cases, and it's like, they are neglecting important factors in evolution. They're important and they're neglected. I could give a laundry list of all the things that are important that they neglect, and it's easy to show that they are important and they neglect them. Most of my arguments against evolutionary biology are things that they neglect and that they don't think are important, like eukaryotic evolution and things like membrane-bound organelles, like the nucleus and nuclear import-export. The list is enormous of things that they neglect. They wouldn't have a theory if they actually started engaging these issues seriously.
Yep, that's true. That's true. The characteristics of life also guarantee that the explanatory frameworks of evolutionary biology will be disappointing to some. Disappointment is caused partly by the sheer complexity of life's dynamic processes. This means that our predictive power will always be weak in certain ways, and that our descriptions of evolution will always be enormous simplifications.
Duh.
Yeah. This isn't a counsel of despair. While all models are wrong, some are useful. Nevertheless, answers to several types of straightforward questions must always be incomplete, and it will always be easy for critics to claim correctly that, quote, things are more complicated, particularly if they don't specify their own explanatory goals. Disappointment also stems from the variety of life. When claims or methods aim at a high generality, they must appeal to common features of living things, and these are few and often abstract.
Yes. And you know what? That was the theme of Biotic Message. Life was designed to resist evolutionary explanations. And it would also resist a general theory, because there would always be these exceptions that would just be nasty. It was designed that way.
Yep. And I believe the gentleman who wrote this is named Welch. Dr. Welch is indirectly endorsing the Biotic Message. So well done, Dr. Welch. I guarantee he's never read the book, but
yeah,
I appreciate you endorsing the central argument. When claims or methods aim at a high generality, I just read that, sorry, I'm a little off. For example, population genetics achieves high generality since importantly similar processes of genome replication characterize all animals, plants, fungi, protists, bacteria, archaea, and viruses. But people interested in those organisms may not be interested in changes in allele frequencies. Hang on a minute. Genome replication, viruses, half of them run on RNA. They don't even realistically have a full genome. I mean, that's nitpicking, but okay. Anyway, more widely appreciated feature of evolution is the appearance and spread of conspicuous novelties, quote, like nothing the world has ever seen before, quote, unquote. There are time-honored ways of studying individual novelties using various forms of, quote, lineage explanation, but a collection of detailed reconstructions is not a theory. Oh!
Oh, we need to say that one. Oh my goodness. A collection of detailed reconstructions is not a theory. Oh!
Ouch! Let's throw phylogenetics out the window, but I mean, that's what you're arguing. Jeez.
I knew this was going to be a fun paper. I just like, oh.
Wow. Okay. Do you realize, I don't know if he realizes he just like put the whole field of phylogenetics down on the floor in front of him and stamped on it. Like,
yeah, you know what? This is actually, from what I hear, this is a glimpse into what their private conversations are like amongst themselves when they're not having to defend themselves in front of creationists. So it may well have been that we're the first creationists that stumbled on this paper and are drawing attention to it, because really this sounds like they're just being very candid with each other, and this paper got accepted because these are the conversations they have.
I've always found that evolutionists are much more candid in the peer-reviewed literature where they don't think people are going to read it than they say to the public or they publish in the pop sci literature.
Exactly. This is yeah.
When they write to each other, they tend to be a whole heck of a lot more honest about what they actually believe.
Yeah. Case in point, right here, a collection of detailed reconstructions is not a theory. Oh,
yeah, that one stings.
I mean, this could be mean. But maybe I have to call this out. I mean, she's a friend, Gutsick Gibbon. I'm just like, Gutsick, you know, just because you have this supposed, and I emphasize supposed phylogenetic reconstruction of primates, it doesn't explain things like butterflies and how they go through those phases where the chrysalis phase, or they just totally melt their body parts and then reassemble. Yeah. Or it doesn't explain eukaryotic evolution.
Yeah.
And so you cannot generalize. You can't generalize your tree building of primates to try to say, oh, evolutionary theory is true. That doesn't work. And this is calling it out right here.
Yeah. And Erica, don't take this personally. Like, I like you. I know Sal likes you. This is not, but making that kind of claim it's not logical. It doesn't logically follow. It's a non sequitur.
And you see that I wanted to point out, one time she said in a debate with Logical Probable that evolutionary theory makes predictions. And I'm just like, well, so did geocentrism. It made actually geocentrism was totally wrong, but it actually made testable predictions, and some of them were borne out. Like, for example, the sun will rise and set every day. I mean, it doesn't make the theory true. And
no, it doesn't. And it doesn't matter how many predictions a theory makes and that are fulfilled. What matters is exclusive predictions.
Exclusive
predictions that are only true of theory X. Like there are. I usually use the Big Bang for this because the Big Bang model has made the one prediction that everybody jumps on is the cosmic microwave background. And yeah, the Big Bang did predict that. It didn't predict the right temperature, and it didn't predict certain properties of it, but it did predict that there would be a cosmic microwave background. But the thing is, multiple creationist models can accommodate a cosmic microwave background.
And even non-creationist models. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that just pointing to the cosmic microwave background, saying, "Hey, we got a prediction." Well, yeah, but everybody else on the field got the same prediction. That doesn't mean anything anymore. Like that doesn't work that way.
Right.
And one of the things that annoys me with evolution, I think Dr. Rob Carter is the one who has this graph he does in his talks, where he puts this stuff up on the screen, says you get all this stuff for evolution, got all this stuff for creation, and then he shows how most of it overlaps between the two. The natural selection, speciation, and you can go on and on and on. That's stuff that's expected under both theories. So you can't use it as a proof for your theory if it fits into another person's theory.
Good point. So see, I knew there would be these one sentence gems or even half sentence gems in this paper.
Mhm.
And again, you're a graduate student of biology, so am I, and so is Erica. This is just this is the sort of conversation that could take place hypothetically among students of science like us.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to reread that sentence here, but a collection of detailed reconstructions is not a theory. And remember, this isn't a creationist writing this. This is an evolutionary biologist. And it is not a surprise or a criticism that the most interesting and ambitious theories of evolutionary novelty are both restricted in scope, applying, for example, to small subsets of traits in a minority of organisms, the multicellular eukaryotes, and make their general claims at quite a high level of abstraction.
Well, they had to mention eukaryotes, yeah.
Yep.
In the multicellular kind, it's like, oh yes, there's novelties there.
Oh yeah,
big time.
Yeah. And of course, he's not actually ditching on evolution, because if you restart with the next paragraph, of course, evolutionary biology does have a very general and powerful idea, but the theory of natural selection causes additional problems. Oh, you're going to admit that too.
Oh,
why don't you just repent of your sin and trust Christ and become a creationist? I mean, shame on me. One problem is its deceptive simplicity. It's an idea that we all think we understand, but which continues to divide experts. The simplicity is deceptive in a second sense. Our intuitions about natural selection are often very poor. Read Douglas Axe's book on whether we can trust intuition. Anyway. For example, nature is full of traits whose complexity make it difficult to see how they can be accounted for by normal natural selection.
Oh,
and so
bravo!
Just keep giving us the store. I mean, at some point, I mean, he's going to argue against this because he's quoting somebody else, but keep giving us the store here. I mean, at this, you may as well surrender. But anyway. And so it is tempting to assume that some factor neglected by current evolutionary thinking must also have played a, quote, creative role.
Oh, I love that word. Creative role.
Yeah, I can point to that factor that you're missing, guys.
He has the right word, creative. I mean,
he's getting there. He's getting there. This argument from our ignorance stems from Mivart, and he quotes from him, but is not restricted to creationists.
Oh, he had to mention us.
He just had to bring it in there. But the thing is, he quotes 4 people, including H. Allen Orr, who I know of, and Orr is an expert on speciation. So this is not like, he's not quoting from the bottom of the barrel here. These are big time thinkers in evolutionary biology. So
yeah, Waddington, Nagel, and Orr. Waddington was the big pioneer of epigenetics. Yeah. If that's the same Waddington. Anyway. Oh yeah, man, so, this is gold.
This is a great find, Sal.
I knew this would be great for Darwin Day. I didn't realize it'd be this good.
This is fantastic. Finally, something about our attitude to the past and to the natural world makes us demand from evolutionary biology some special kinds of impact. These demands are sometimes fairly concrete, e.g. for biological facts to underpin moral theories, but are often much vaguer demands to help us feel at home in the universe or provide us with moral uplift. So evolution can't explain morality. Thank you. Continue.
Well, this is really fun because some of them, I mean, to them, it is a beautiful theory. For some of them, it's not it makes them feel special. And it's only as I spent some time with, especially the hardened atheists, they want to have some feeling of belonging to all of nature because their God is nature. And they want to be a part of it. I mean, I've read some of their stuff. It's like, yeah, this is very pantheistic. At the root, there's a very deep set pantheism and a worship of nature, and they want to be a part of it.
Yep. He goes on, and I think this is going to stick pretty well as well. For authors who make such demands, natural selection causes problems, not only because it is mindless and amoral, but because it can seem downright immoral. Now, I'd like to know how he defines morality apart from God.
Yes.
I'd like the answer to that question.
Well, if I could point out, there was an embarrassing episode that they still, Jerry Coyne tried to shut it down, and he was really upset. And I'm just like, why? This follows straightforward from evolutionary theory. So they were two researchers, Thornhill and Palmer, evolutionary psychologists, they said the propensity to rape in the animal kingdom is a favorable trait. Oh,
okay. I can see why they made that argument.
Yes.
But oh my.
I mean, what they did is they just surveyed the animal kingdom and said, look at the propensity of, males forcing themselves throughout the animal kingdom.
It's common. It's normal. It happens a lot.
And so when they say downright immoral, so Welch here was very careful not to cite Thornhill and Palmer in that whole exchange. But then there's another article, an entire book by David Buss. He said why murder is also a favorable trait, and he makes a very compelling argument that, and if you look at it in terms of like, okay, if the whole goal, if the whole operation in natural selection is the individual passing traits that make him more reproductively successful, there's a certain logic to this.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Welch buys onto that logic. But before we go any further, I just want to point out, this is a phrase I use a lot on my channel. Ideas have consequences.
Consequences.
Wow. Ideas have consequences. If you go around telling people that their only purpose in life is to reproduce, what do you think is going to happen? If you go around telling people that they're in conflict with other people for mates, what do you think is going to happen? This was predictable. It doesn't take that much to understand enough human psychology to know that if you tell people that their only purpose is to reproduce, that they're going to do it by whatever means necessary, whether that's morally right or not. Anyway, sorry, ideas have consequences, folks. They have consequences. And Dr. Welch is going to try to deny that here in a second, but they have consequences. For example, Saunders writes, there is a further danger as well. Darwinist explanations inherently invoke selfishness and greed as the most important driving forces. This isn't true, and even Darwin's own emphasis on struggle probably rests on a mistake, but there is a very weak sense in which natural selection involves competition, and there is a lot of research on conflicts.
By the way, he uses the word Darwinist.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, by the way, for that. Weak sense? No, it's not the weak sense. It's very much a strong sense in which you must mate and pass on your offspring in order to be, quote unquote, a winner in the natural fitness lottery. And whatever you have to do to get there is perfectly justifiable.
So far, I mean, this should almost be required reading in an evolutionary biology class, but it's not going to happen.
No, I not. No way. No way. They want to slide a lot of this stuff under the rug. I'm surprised Welch is even bringing up some of this stuff because it's just, it does not do evolutionary biology any favors in the eyes of the general public. Now, it may sound okay to another hardened evolutionary biologist, but the general public reads stuff like this?
Well, you see, that's why we are doing our public service here. is we're actually privy to things that they would say candidly to each other that they don't expect any creationists to be in on.
I guarantee you, basically nobody outside of academic fields has ever read this paper, and there's a reason for that.
Well, right. You see, we're graduate students of biology. This is part of our of our journey through graduate school and being students of biology. So yes. They didn't count on people like us matriculating through school.
Not really. I haven't got there yet, Sal. That's the reason my camera's off. No, I'm just kidding. Because I have my camera on my own thing, so that's not why. But anyway, the problems discussed above have no common thread, and they apply widely in evolutionary biology. However, they coalesce in a special way for one research program, the study of adaptive function. The goal of such research is not a precise description of evolutionary change. Instead, it aims for a strong account of phenotypic function, which is linked to a partial account of why those phenotypes exist. Research of this kind is found across biology because traits of all kinds might be adaptations, but it has attracted most attention in behavioral ecology. Such research uses ideas related to optimization, including tools from engineering and economics, and often represents evolution in terms of imaginary agents with imaginary agendas.
Oh, stop.
I was going to if you didn't.
Represents evolution in terms of imaginary agents and with imaginary agendas. Time out here. I've often said evolutionary biology needs all these fixes, appeals to imaginary agents, and then they added imaginary agendas. How it's just ironic then that they're going to be criticizing creationists, because I said another way of framing it, evolutionary biology needs miracles of special creation in order for it to be viable. Mm-hmm. So how is it really different from creationism? They just don't want to admit it. Your take on that sentence?
No, I completely agree with you. Like, invoking agency in evolutionary biology should be heresy for them, but they do it all the time.
Imaginary agents with imaginary agendas.
Oh, yeah, I just... For an evolutionary biologist, like, according to, Richard Dawkins has said something along the lines of that there's no agency, there's no forethought, there's nothing like that. And yet they can't help themselves. They're constantly invoking agency because they know in their heart of hearts that there is some agency behind the stuff they're studying. They just don't want to admit it. Anyway, moving along. So to see why this might be useful, consider leaf insects of genus Phyllium and butterflies of genus Anteos. These genera both contain leaf mimics, which look quite similar and probably do so for similar reasons. The reasons are adaptive rationales, and they do not imply any similarity in the ontogenies of the genera, nor in the details of their evolutionary history. So in other words, similarity does not equal ancestry, but except when it does.
But they have same adaptive rationales.
Yes. Like, this baffles me. Like, they use homologies and they use... I forget the word for it. I used it the other night when I was talking to a rational empiricist. But they use shared synapomorphies. There it is, shared synapomorphies. And where they argue that shared traits are evidence of ancestry, but these two organisms don't share any ancestry or very little ancestry according to them, and they've got similar traits. This is what they call convergent evolution. This is their excuse every time they find shared traits of organisms that aren't related. And they use this as an excuse all the time. Well, they just, they both had to adapt. But if you thought they were related, you would say that this was evidence of ancestry. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Pick one. I don't care which one you pick, but pick one. Nevertheless, hypotheses about these reasons can be tested, e.g. from morphology alone, and we might predict that certain resting sites will be favored in a controlled choice experiment, and we might predict that both genera live in habitats that contain similar-looking leaves and visually guided predators that might dine happily on insects but not on leaves. Okay, but that doesn't tell you anything about evolution. That tells you absolutely nothing about their evolution. That tells you why they have certain traits, but it doesn't tell you where the traits came from.
And importantly, it's not a proof of common ancestry. No, it's actually a workaround for a problem that common ancestry, the assumption of common ancestry creates. So this isn't a proof of evolution. This is what we could call, evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg called it an epicycle, which is kind of a fix of the old geocentric theory.
Yep. And every time they had a problem with it, they would just keep adding epicycles. That's exactly what they're doing to evolutionary biology right now. That's exactly what they're doing. Is they're just patching it all over with epicycles. And one of these days, somebody named Copernicus came along for the geocentrists. One of these days, somebody's gonna come along for the evolutionary biologists and go, "Hey guys, you've just been adding epicycles for the last 100 years or whatever. Knock it off." Moving on here. Let's see, where did I leave off? Identifying, quote, agents is, I actually skipped a sentence. Identifying agendas, quote, is necessary if we want to distinguish the proper function of the mimicry, camouflage from predators, from accidental byproducts, attracting wildlife photographers, and from malfunctions, attracting herbivores. Okay, so you have to identify what the trait does. Okay, that's fine. No problem with that. Identifying, quote, agents is useful for predicting which parts of the world will act as if in accordance with the agenda. I'm not even going to go there. I'm just, okay. For example, leaves play a crucial role in explaining the presence of leaf mimics, but they are not usefully considered as agents in this case. E.g., we would not expect leaves to evolve leg-like structures to more closely resemble their mimics, nor to direct their growth towards them.
That's actually kind of interesting that they're, because one could almost, I mean, the problem is what story is right. That's where they're.
Yeah. Like, why would leaves not evolve legs to ward off herbivores? Like, why can't we flip this story on its head and say, why wouldn't leaves evolve to mimic leaf mimics? Because, I mean, everything's supposed to be an evolutionary arms race. So why are leaves not evolving, mini-looking, something that looks like legs so that they look like a leaf mimic so that herbivores don't chow down on them? Why is that not happening? Because everything's supposed to be an evolutionary arms race. So why not? Wouldn't that benefit the fitness of the plant if herbivores weren't going to chow down on it because they thought it was a leaf mimic? Yes, you can argue that leaves would not expect to evolve leg-like structures to more closely resemble their mimics if they were designed in the first place. But if everything's an evolutionary arms race and everybody's always trying to compete, like they talk about how humans and viruses are in an evolutionary arms race and diseases, they talk about that a lot in the diseases area, evolutionary arms races. Well, if that's true, where are the legs on leaves? Just from this example. And to me, that's just, I don't know. Am I losing my mind?
I get where they're going is because there is a problem. It's like, how do we know that our story is correct and that we're not misperceiving it? And that's the problem. See, we don't have these problems in chemistry or physics, but basically what they're doing is they're throwing metaphors at things. It's like, how do we know that that's the right metaphor or the best metaphor to describe things?
Yeah.
Now, biology is described with lots of metaphors. It's really amazing. And something that our philosopher friend Danny pointed out, he said, you don't see metaphors used quite to that extent in the other disciplines like physics and chemistry, but you see it used a lot in biology.
Yep.
And the thing is, how do we know that this is the correct metaphor for evolution? It works very well to use metaphors for operational things. So we will call something signal transduction or feedback control or coding, decoding, or error correction. Those are actually metaphors. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in chemistry that says that these are the correct metaphors. Nothing. But yet they're remarkably accurate metaphors, and engineers understand them. And
that's what it's doing. We call it that because that's what it's doing.
That's what it's doing. And so they're faced with that problem here. I'm sorry, go on. Go on, Emory.
I was just saying it's got nothing to do with the actual chemistry, but that's what it's doing.
Exactly. And so they're faced with the same thing here. We're trying to explain this adaptation. I actually think that this is the correct description, that the butterflies are mimicking the leaves, so they're not preyed upon. And I think that is the correct description, but the problem is they have no way of validating it.
Right.
And we run into a comparable problem, but not as severe in operational biology. There's this whole debate about whether the genetic code is a real code, but we actually have parallels in the engineering world. We could say, well, this is how we characterize what a code would do. And therefore this is an appropriate metaphor.
Yep.
So the problem is if we begin to think about this, it's like, oh, wow, are animals kind of special? And I would argue, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just in passing, I've actually at the protein level, I notice animals have very special. If you take the homologs of animal proteins, it looks like they are very special compared to the homologs in other domains. And so the idea that the animal is preferred probably is correct. And this is kind of like, well,
Right.
I want to take that one step further. It's like, oh, are humans like very special? And I've seen observational chemical evidence of this. It was in a recent publication I worked on, and it just, I mean, that wasn't the point, but I said, look at all the post-translational modifications on humans that you don't find in any other organism. And we have a lot of them. We have like on the topoisomerase, we have like 150, and they're like only 11 in yeast and none in bacteria. It's like, oh, that kind of makes us really, really special. What if we find that for all our proteins? I mean, how much is it going to take to show that we are really special? And this is probably something they don't want to go toward, because you know where it's going to point, that we're exceptional.
Yep. And they don't want that. I had someone get very angry with me in a graduate school thread in a discussion board because I just pointed out that we behave slightly differently than chimps. And I didn't talk about creation, human exceptionality, none of that. It was related to chimp human behavior and how do you understand that kind of stuff. And I was just pointing out that, we do some things that the chimps don't do. And I listed, 2 or 3 examples. I wasn't really trying to be exhaustive. I was just, hey, we do some things different. So we may need to think about this a little differently than we are thinking about it, than thinking about chimp. And I had a guy just go off on me. And I'm like, bud, I didn't argue for creation. I didn't argue for no. I just said, nope, sorry guys, we're not doing that. And I mean, it's just like they're going to do anything to protect the humans aren't special. And by the way, I agree. I'm just for everybody who may not have gotten the wrong impression of what I was saying. I agree with Sal. Like, I think this is the correct analogy, but I'm asking the question: why in the evolutionary arms race scenario are we not seeing plants moving toward the leaf hoppers or whatever, or the leaf insects? Because they should be, if everything's an arms race.
And by the way, I remember your story just now and how the professor had to weigh in because the other guy was just being...
Yeah, it got a little out of control. And I just...
That's a real tender spot,
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, the professor was a real easygoing guy, and he just kind of let everything kind of just slide off his back, so it wasn't a big deal for him. But the one student was really upset just about it. So anyway, we'll move on a little bit here. Hypothesizing about adaptive rationales is easy to do badly and difficult to do well. Furthermore, research tends to focus on cases that require some ingenuity. No Crafoord prizes for explaining why leaf insects look like leaves. Yeah, I think we can all figure that one out on our own. Nevertheless, a central goal of the study of adaptation has been to rein in functional ascription, restricting its use to cases where it does real explanatory or predictive work. So while the historical processes that have resulted in adaptations are remarkably diverse, research on adaptive function focuses on a single component of total change, the optimizing tendency that results from and is sometimes defined as the action of natural selection. Interesting. This is the part of dynamics that makes it useful to talk about functions. Similarly, the adaptations themselves are remarkably diverse, but the list of agents and agendas is very limited. In most cases, the agents are organisms and their agenda is to increase their inclusive fitness. Although, as Dawkins argued, more or less the same idea can be recast with genes as the agents and gene survival as the agenda. Okay, I got a lot I can say about that, but if I do that, we're here all night.
Yes, well, this could relate to sexual selection.
It sort of does-ish.
Well, or more, it would be, let me try to frame that. If the agenda is to optimize something that is not reproductive success, what is it optimizing? So in the case of like the peacock's tail, the design argument that says it is optimized to glorify the creator so that men will wonder at their creator. And it's like, yeah, because natural selection doesn't explain it. It's actually evidence against natural selection. And there are other things that are optimized now that the biophysics, which is the area that I'm really interested in, because I have my physics engineering background coupled with biology. It's just natural. I'm in biophysics. They're finding what is actually optimized. It is not reproductive success. It is things like geometric optics. It is things like the optimal capability of sensing magnetic fields or electric fields, or what is the optimal sensory organ that could absolutely operate at the limit of physics in terms of detecting photons or individual molecules. And the list keeps growing, and it's a little bit it's a little bit scary in that it's totally awe-inspiring. There was a lecture recently by William Biolek that said life is more perfect than we imagine. So the thing that's being optimized is not reproductive success.
Nope. No.
I mean, what good is it to have an Arctic tern that can fly from the North to South Pole? That is very reproductively challenging. I mean, I'm kind of concerned about the species because it's expending a lot of energy to be flying 40,000 miles a year to be doing its thing. Yeah. But from the go on, Emory.
No. Finish what you're saying, then I'll chime in.
But from the standpoint of creating creatures like Arctic terns that fly 40,000 miles a year, that have been gifted with these tremendous navigational capabilities and the desire to fly 40,000 miles a year, like say from the North Pole to South Pole, but not a direct route, or to have a peacock's tail, it is very well optimized to show the ingenuity of a designer that's just almost for kicks making these extravagant Rube Goldberg machines. Yeah. So there is a conflict between what we actually see optimized versus the claim that we're optimizing reproductive success. Right. Because if we optimize reproductive success, all experiments and observations say that we should be headed towards simplicity. And yes, it looks like complexity and also this level of perfection in biology is not explained by natural selection, which actually is showing to be selecting against it in the long term.
Yeah. And I think something else that we can just lay out on that, if reproductive success was the only thing being optimized, we would expect that the vast majority of energy expenditure should be pointed toward reproduction. And yet something like the Arctic tern spends far more energy flying from the North to South Pole than it ever uses in reproduction. The amount of energy that it needs to fly that far, I don't know how many miles that is, but it's a lot. And the reproductive season is fairly short. It doesn't spend that much time on reproduction. It spends a lot more time flying.
Yeah. And how about the butterflies? They're spending a lot of time just in that chrysalis stage. It's like, where did that come from?
Yep. Yeah. So the reproductive fitness, it's a train wreck. And you've done whole talks on that, so I'm not going to get into that too far.
Well, no, actually I haven't. Maybe I need to. Maybe we need to.
I think that's actually a really good idea, something we can work on one time, maybe when I get on my break or something, or maybe I might have time, depending on how heavy my class load gets, but I might work on something on that because reproductive fitness is garbage. It's utter garbage.
Yes.
Anyway, but that's not what we're here for, so we'll go on a little bit. Of course, the theoretical machinery is only needed to understand difficult cases, and in practice, there's a lot of leeway. For example, measures of performance such as foraging success or steadiness of gait are often used as proxies for inclusive fitness. Wait. Again, reproductive success, fitness, train wreck. And the mode of inheritance is often ignored by focusing solely on the phenotypes. That's true and a major problem if you're talking about reproductive success. Nevertheless, this research program rejects claims that water can cause adaptations or that ecosystems have functions in the same sense as do, e.g., eyes. Adaptations distinguish living things from other complex dynamical systems such as
Emory, you're getting kind of soft. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'll jump back to the start of the paragraph. Can you hear me okay now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Adaptations distinguish living things from other complex systems, such as piles of sand or the weather. Nevertheless, it is clear that methods designed for studying adaptive function won't be much used for many evolutionary biologists. I can't even finish that sentence without laughing.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay. Ooh, well, studying adaptive function is no use for evolutionary biology. Okay. Including those with other sorts of questions about adaptation. Other biologists might want to understand macroecological patterns, such as latitudinal species gradient, obtain a more detailed description of evolutionary history of one particular lineage or trait, e.g. the evolution of feathers or vestigial eyes. Okay. Investigate the evolution of apparently maladaptive phenotypes, such as reproductive isolation or senescence, or selective processes that are unlikely to lead to adaptations, e.g. non-transmissible cancers, or between clade differences in speciation rates. Investigate the evolution of the many second-order properties that might influence a population's future evolution, or simply quantify the action of natural selection. Okay. The non-adaptationist research includes most work in evolutionary biology, including almost all of population genetics. Sal, do you want to comment on this?
This is actually new. The non-adaptationist research. I've never heard it labeled as that. That's a new field. Non-adaptationist. I'm a non-adaptationist researcher.
Apparently.
No, this is news to me. Oh, let's go on. Maybe we'll see.
Here, the aim is to describe a dynamical process, allele frequency change, and this implies a stronger focus on genetic drift and a different picture of natural selection. For population geneticists, natural selection is a quantifiable bias in the transmission of alleles between generations. This involves no imaginary agent and might not lead to anything being optimized. Selection doesn't optimize anything necessarily. You aren't making a new organismal kind that way, guys. You really aren't. Anyway.
Well, actually, this is interesting, and it's almost too bad that he's so thick here in his language. Welch is. The insiders would know what he's talking about, because in my talk on Fisher's theorem and really population genetics in general, I said the problem is all you're optimizing is reproductive success. If you're talking about natural selection, or comparably bad, there's no optimization. You're just drifting. So you either have a random walk or just reproductive success being optimized. And the problem is what happens if to optimize reproductive success, you're ditching organs and genes. Then you have a real problem then that natural selection is an agent against the accumulation of complexity. And they don't really want to come out and say that, oh my goodness, all this math and population genetics is just pure theater, as if you solve something profound when you absolutely have not. And that it doesn't explain the origin of complexity. It doesn't explain the kind of things like the adaptations, like the mimicry in butterflies. The equations of population genetics do not explain that. And it's like, well, what the heck does it really explain then? It's like, maybe nothing. I mean, it's interesting math. I mean, I learned a few math theorems in the process, but that was about it.
I want to keep reading because he's going to say some stuff here, which I think will really bear into what you just said. So, because I'm skimming down while I was listening to you.
Right. If you could be closer to the mic. I'm sorry to be harping on you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So I want to read down here just a little bit more here because he's going to say some stuff that's going to back you up here in just a second. So I want to read down just a little bit because I was reading a little bit here. This involves no imaginary agency and might not lead to anything being optimized. Indeed, it is easy to write down simple models that appear to act as counterexamples to any proposed maximand. This seems paradoxical because population genetics is often said to underpin research on biological adaptation. And it does, but the underpinning is subtle, full of caveats, as it must be in a world full of maladaptation, and also in certain ways contingent. Other dynamic processes could do a similar job.
Oh.
The relationship is close for empirical reasons. There just aren't many, or any, examples of engineering or agency-type thinking doing useful work in biology without natural selection acting on genomic variation having played a role. Only because you don't want there to be. That statement is pure bluff and bluster. And notice, by the way, he doesn't cite anybody for it. That's pure bluff and bluster. That's all that is. It's a garbage sentence. It's a waste of a sentence.
So that's what I mean. I didn't know what he was saying, actually. There just aren't many or any examples of engineering or agency type thinking doing useful work in
biology.
Yeah, that's just really
that's a garbage sentence.
That's a garbage sentence, and it's not exactly true, because agency type thinking, like let's say optimizing for geometric optics or optimizing for electric sensing. I mean, these electric, I've talked to mathematical physicists doing work on radar. I described what's going on in sharks, and their jaws dropped. They said that's right at the limit of physics. We don't build things like that. We can't.
Yeah.
So.
Let's see. So the two research programs are often closely connected, and they often interact in fruitful ways, but their goals and pictures of natural selection remain distinct. So in other words, natural selection is two things to two different people.
Yes, to Dawkins and the population geneticist, it's different. And in fact, I caught him in my paper that said Dawkins doesn't even understand the fundamental theorem of natural selection, which he claims is the central theorem of biology. He doesn't even understand it. And so what he thinks it represents isn't what it actually represents. And so their view, Lewontin had a very good paper on the problem of what they think natural selection actually selects. Mm-hmm. And he was saying the problem with population genetics, it's nothing more than just a listing of reproductive outcomes. Because he said, how is it fundamentally different than just listing which thing created more offspring? It's not always clear that it was due to reproductive success. Mm-hmm. In terms of natural differential reproductive success, it could be accidents. We see that with genetic drift. Something could end up a trait could overtake the population, and it had nothing to do with kind of inherent ability to reproduce more, because it could just be some strange accident that caused one trait to be fixed in the population.
Yep. Unfortunately. So now it gets into some critiques of adaptive function here. Several different critiques of evolutionary biology make more sense if understood, at least in part, as failure to appreciate the distinct goals of research on adaptive function. For example, there's been a recent call to abandon the most successful edition of evolutionary biology in the last few decades, William W.D. Hamilton's inclusive fitness theory, IFT, sometimes called kin selection. Oh, yes, I know about this. This was in my evolutionary biology class. The critics, Nowak et al., Allen et al., etc., have argued that, 1, IFT often gives a description of allele frequency change that is inadequate and or inaccurate, particularly when there are complex interactions. IFT has made few predictions that are truly quantifiable. And 3, IFT is never necessary because it is always possible to give a complete description of allele frequency changes that make no mention of IFT. The critics conclude that IFT should be abandoned in favor of standard selection theory. Defenders of IFT have replied that IFT is a predictive theory of adaptation which is successful because it focuses on a single component of evolutionary change, the optimizing tendency that characterizes a very broad class of evolutionary histories. That optimization tendency doesn't exist in evolutionary theory. We don't see that. That's not there, but okay. IFT has explained a very large number of biological adaptations that have proven puzzling. Adaptations involving suicidal self-sacrifice. Maybe? I'd have to look into that. Beyond this basic insight, IFT has been a remarkably productive research program with a large number of testable and tested predictions. I see you smiling, Sal. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Well, this is, again, what my criticisms of when Erica Gutzik-Gibbon was saying, evolutionary theory makes all these predictions. I'm just like, well, look at IFT. It's making the same claims. Doesn't necessarily make it true. Mm-hmm. Because even within the evolutionary community, there's disagreements. Yeah. And that's the only reason I laugh, because IFT looks kind of like, it looks like its parent theory of evolutionary biology. It boasts a lot of large number of testable and tested predictions.
Yeah. Notice that one could agree with all 6 claims and diagnose only a difference in research goals. Arguments 1 to 3 are very similar to 1 to 3, have also appeared in other contexts. While the details differ, the common claim is that research in evolutionary biology oversimplifies the process of evolution by placing too much emphasis on a limited range of factors, natural selection, unlinked genes, additive effects, etc. These arguments are familiar in part because they are made by 2 quite different groups of critics. First, there are researchers who are interested in describing evolution but not very interested in adaptive function. To these researchers, a lot of valid research in evolutionary biology can seem sloppy, inappropriately anthropomorphic, or willfully ignorant of evolution's complexities.
Oh, yeah.
I would agree. A lot of it is very sloppy. Very, very sloppy. I've read a lot of it. It's very sloppy.
I mean, I'm sorry to harp on this, but if you saw like say we're trying to make a very precise clock in physics, like these cesium beam atomic clocks, no one will accuse the discipline of being sloppy. It's the same in chemistry, and yet, supposedly this discipline that's supposed to be the heart of biology, and they act as if it's a central science. This is not good that it's being described as sloppy or willfully ignorant. I mean, that's not good.
Not really, no. So, okay, hang on a second. My phone has frozen up, so I need to quickly fix that real quick. See if I can. Ah, there we go. Okay, there we go. Got it back. So, in this case, arguments similar to 4 through 6 can be an appropriate response. For researching biological function, malfunction, and adaptive rationales, it can be useful or necessary to focus exclusively on natural selection, conceived as an optimizing tendency, and on a limiting range of agents. By contrast,
agendas.
And agendas, yes, and agendas. Sorry, I missed that word. By contrast, the second group of critics dislike standard theories of adaptive function and wish to see them undermined. The reasons for this dislike are not always scientific, but involve anxieties about agency and overall purpose, which the theories seem to raise.
I'm sorry, this is too good.
It goes on. The anxieties are easy enough to understand. While naturalistic, the theories superficially resemble a transcendental account of value. They provide criteria for judging behaviors as better or worse without reference to anybody's attitudes. But the values they superficially endorse are unattractive. The imaginary motives for imaginary agents are generally base. And in some accounts, the imaginary agents are not even human. Anxieties can be real, even if they are baseless, and the aims of these critics are at best viewed as therapeutic. That one stings. I don't know how that got through peer review. Youch. Wow. That's not professional. That's bias. That's bias right there.
Yes.
That is.
You could tell what the editors their biases are.
Yeah, I don't know how that got through peer review. That's a personal attack.
Oh my goodness.
That's nasty. To this end, theories of adaptive function can be undermined in any number of ways. A common strategy is to diffuse the imaginary agency more liberally around the system. First, by emphasizing any of the factors that the theories neglect, ignoring the principled reasons for their neglect, and then by redescribing the factors using the language of agency, e.g. natural genetic engineering, directed mutation, self-organization, Gaia, niche construction, or terms with strong connotations of agency, such as non-random or plasticity. Just to make sure I'm on the same track, he's basically arguing that any attempt to add some agency into biology is being made in a dishonest fashion? I mean, does that sounds like what he's saying?
Well, I don't read it that way.
Okay.
I think he is highlighting the fact. I mean, this is what we see in biology right now. I don't know if you saw the whole argument about whether cells are machines or not. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
And so you see, we have two sets of people who are, I'm assuming, are naturalists. Have a naturalistic worldview, And some of them say, well, the best way to describe the cell is in terms of a machine. And then there are other people that get just really uncomfortable with that. There's polar, just like, don't you dare raise that, because that sounds too much like purpose and value. And it just is a little too close to design.
And that sounds kind of like what this, like Dr. Welch is putting out here, is this stuff sounds a little bit too designed. We can't have that.
So that passage there is still gold. I'm glad it passed peer review. In this case, anxieties can be real even if they are baseless. And the aims of these critics are best viewed as therapeutic. Okay, so we have speed of sound and all those guys that have these daily weather reports, and they need some therapy because they don't like the fact a large number of biologists are calling cells and all these other processes and all these other systems in the cell as machines. So they need some therapy.
I'm not going to comment on that because I'm not interacting with those guys, but oh my.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that is just not very overt, but you have to kind of been in it to kind of see what they're saying in between the lines, because there is that undercurrent that makes them uneasy about purpose. I mean, they're skirting it. So, are they being two-faced? I don't think they're deliberately doing it. I think they want to remain naturalistic. Yet on the other hand, it's a very poor metaphor. You need good metaphors to describe what's going on in biology. It makes sense. What are you going to call the genetic code if you don't like the word code? What are you going to call it?
I don't know. Like I found a paper a little while ago from an Italian scientist who didn't like the phrase genetic information, so he wrote a whole paper proving that it was possible to talk about genetic information without ever using the word information. I'm like, okay, you didn't use the word information. It doesn't change what it actually is.
Right. You see, that metaphor, the reason you use a metaphor, it distinguishes what the system is. It highlights, I mean, if you just say the relationship of the codons to it's just not very succinct. It just doesn't have the same impact. It just, the simple term of genetic code is really just conveys what the system does very well. Mm-hmm. And there's a political move to kind of, they don't like that because it looks too purposeful.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to skip down to the discussion so we can finish this thing, Sal, because we can go for like
this has been a fun paper, by the way. Oh my goodness, this exceeded expectations. Oh, by the way, for the viewers, Emory and I did not read the whole paper in advance, so that's why we're having a lot of fun.
I skimmed it, and by skimmed, I mean skimmed like 5 minutes before I came on the air, because I was doing graduate school homework until then. So yeah, that's why I'm enjoying this thing so much. So discussion. Claims that evolutionary biology is flawed or importantly incomplete are as old as the field. The criticisms are characterized by the diversity at any given time, as seen in the laundry list of ideas and observations that are championed by critics, and he gives a bunch of lists, and by their persistence over time. There are very strong similarities between the arguments of, say, mid-20th century critics and critics writing 50 years earlier. This does not mean that the critics are wrong. Oh, that's good. Both the diversity and persistence of criticism might be explained by the intransigence and lack of ambition in the field, by, quote, the intolerance and narrow-mindedness of some who advocate Darwinism. That's a quote from somebody else, but he's referencing it positively. So, yeah, particularly in its, quote, orthodox or, quote, ultra or, quote, hard-mind forms. However, this explanation is not very plausible. Oh, you haven't interacted with enough evolutionary biologists, buddy. Critics and, quote, novel findings of all kinds have never lacked attention in evolutionary biology, and this sprawling field could have no means of enforcing conformity to any of its tenets. Yes, it does. It's called the university tenure system.
Yes.
What are you? Who are you kidding? Like, never mind. I'm not going to go there. But really, it would not be possible for someone like Dr. Jerry Bergman to write a whole book entitled "Slaughter of the Dissidents" if you people didn't constantly kick out dissenters. Constantly. I mean, this has been going on since the 80s. Kurt Wise tells a story about when he was PhD student for Stephen Jay Gould, some guy called Gould, some professor from some other school, and told him, "Do you know you have a creationist in your PhD program?" He's sitting in Gould's office when Gould took the call. And do you know you have a creationist in your PhD program? You got to get out of there. And apparently Gould had a fit on the guy and just started screaming and swearing at him. "It's my student. I'm going to do what I want to do," and on and on and on and on and on. And it's like, which, I mean, kudos to Gould for doing that. But at the same time, this has been going on forever. They don't tolerate dissent. This is not the fact that somebody could publish an article in 2017 and with a straight face tell me there's no means of enforcing conformity. My ear. This has been going on forever. Ask Marcus Ross about that sometime. The man got kicked out of his PhD program.
And it's not just that, it's also the peer-reviewed system.
Yeah.
Just briefly, we've had a paper rejected 7 times. The editor said our conclusions were correct. The main aim of our paper was to falsify Ono's 1984 theory. And they said, "You're correct. Ono was wrong, but we're not going to publish." At least I credit them for at least being straight up with us. Yeah. But they'll give all sorts of reasons why. And
Walter Remine published a paper in Journal of Creation a number of years ago that he had sent out to be reviewed by the leading population geneticists. And they basically all said, "Yeah, you're right. Everything you said is right." And he didn't talk about creation, didn't talk about none of that. It was just basically digging a hole for population genetics. And they didn't like it very much. And so all the leading population genetics said, "Yeah, we know this, but we're not going to let you publish this. This is nothing new. We've known this since the 70s. But it's not in print anywhere except on the Journal of Creation website because they won't publish it because it is a little bit too truthful."
Yes.
Anyway, it has been argued here that discontent is better understood as stemming from a few inescapable properties of living things, which lead to disappointment with evolutionary biology and a nagging feeling that reform must be overdue.
Wait. It said stemming as from a few, a few inescapable properties. It's like, that number, I think, is going to keep growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It has been further argued that this particular discontent stems from misunderstandings and dislike of one well-known subfield, the study of adaptive function in tradition of behavioral ecology. So, in other words, the reason people are upset with evolutionary biology is not because there's something wrong with it. It's because they don't like it. They want to take their toys and go home. That's a really broad ad hominem right there. That's again, how'd that get through peer review? But anyway.
You know what? So the study, it has been further argued that particular discontent stems from misunderstanding and dislike of one well-known subfield, the study of adaptive function. I guess that the author and the editors are probably researchers in adaptive function.
That would be my guess. What we've done here, we need to look up Welch's publications and see what he's published on, because I'll almost guarantee you adaptive function is going to be in his publication list. Make sure we do that on the air too, so because that's kind of important that we actually did that. One of the few things shared by the laundry list items is their minor role in the theories of adaptive function. Therefore, all can be championed as alternatives to such research, things that we might or should study instead, or as observations that promise to invalidate these theories because they affect outcomes in the world, but are not center stage in the theories. The subfield is a particular target because it is atypical. Most researchers do not share its goals, and because it requires a very partial description of evolution as something like inclusive fitness maximization, and because it uses ideas of apparent purpose and imaginary agency, but in a limited way to make testable predictions and not to inspire or dignify. For all these reasons, the special criticism directed at the subfield is not surprising, but it is a pity. With the inherent focus on plastic phenotypes and whole organisms, its common focus on sociality and cooperation, deep roots in ecology, strong ties to developmental biology, agnosticism about the details of inheritance, and above all, its remarkably productive synthesis of modeling, field observation, experiment, behavioral ecology seems like the sort of science that many critics of evolutionary biology might otherwise embrace. This guy has to have published in this. Like, he has to have. That list is such a glowing, loving, adoring list. Oh my! It's like reading slop that you would address to a king to make him feel better about himself. I mean, good night. Oh, how do you? Such sycophancy. Oh, my word. he has to have published in this field. There's no way this guy's not published it. Either that or is good friends with people who have, because there's no way. This is not an unbiased review. Nowhere close. Anyway, moving on. If the account above can explain some puzzling things, it also has some obvious weaknesses. No duh. First, and as ever in biology, an attempt to explain a pattern is not to deny the exceptions. This article makes no serious attempt to rebut any single criticism of evolutionary biology, and no attempt at all to restrict what is studied. What has been argued is that there can be smoke without fire. Okay. That persistent and voluble criticism of evolutionary biology is to be expected, whether or not anything is seriously wrong. Okay. Second, the above account involves some speculation about the extra scientific motives, and this is always foolhardy and offensive. Then why'd you do it? And why'd you publish it in a science journal and call it science? But this may be unavoidable. We do need to explain why ideas are so often hailed as important before they have done much scientific work, and why claims that seem utterly banal, things are more complicated, natural selection doesn't explain everything, individuals with the same genotype can have different phenotypes, might be treated as momentous, vital, or urgent. It is also undeniable that a lot of writing about evolutionary biology has its mind on higher things, the same shop-worn collection of topics from Marx and Spencer to markets and trolley problems. Evolutionary biology is like history, but unlike other natural sciences, oh wait, this is going to be a good sentence, raises issues of purpose, agency along those of complexity and generality. And so there will always be those who agree with Carr that methods and explanatory goals cannot and should not be separated from political or religious agendas. So translation, evolutionary biology is a historical science, not an empirical one. That's a big admission, because they like to conflate evolutionary biology with the biology that gives us cell phones and computers and everything else. Or that's not biology, but most of it isn't anyway. But they want to conflate that with things we can observe, test, and repeat in the lab. And I'm sorry, you can't do that. And this is not, that's he's not the only one who's come up with this. Go ahead.
And that's very misleading to put it on par with experimental sciences. Yeah. It really is. It's terrible.
Yeah. And the thing is, he's not the only guy who says this. Like a bunch of other people say that. Herpetologist Jonathan Losos from Harvard, no less. He also is the author of a college science textbook, co-author, biology textbook. He said the same thing. I actually have that quote on my website on the Evolutionist Quotables page, because he said, yeah, basically it's a historical science. It's like astronomy and geology, I think was his exact quote. And I'm like, thank you. Why don't you say this stuff more often? Anyway, but of course.
So the methods, that you just read something that methods and explanatory goals cannot and should not be separated from political or religious agendas.
Yeah, that's not the opinion of the author, but he's pointing that there's always people who are going to think that way.
Okay.
Some may even agree with Bateson that Waddington's work on genetic assimilation, showing that environmentally induced traits can become less sensitive to environmental conditions following allele frequency change, really does have implications for, quote, the battle between non-moral materialism and the more mystical view of the universe. It is remarkable, for example, that much of the funding for, much of the funding for challenging current practices in evolutionary biology comes from the John Templeton Foundation, which incidentally funds BioLogos, which is committed to using science to reveal underlying purpose and rejecting what Nagel called the, quote, materialistic neo-Darwinian conception of nature. But perhaps this is just history repeating itself as farce. If poetry couldn't save us, nothing on the laundry list will either.
If poetry couldn't save us, nothing on the laundry lists will either.
Is he perhaps referring to Genesis?
There's almost like kind of inside statements here that they would understand.
Yeah, that certain, like there's some stuff here that I think he might be writing slightly obtuse on purpose to avoid getting some criticism, because he's made some not so pleasant statements about some people who are criticizing evolutionary biology in need of therapy. I mean, okay, really? If criticism of evolutionary biology is inevitable, why grouse about it? It's easy to habituate to misleading alarm calls and churlish to complain about peripheral ideas, which by definition have little influence on what most scientists do. However, claims that evolutionary biology is misguided or importantly incomplete are not harmless, but actively hinder progress in the field. Indeed, they do so in several ways. First, the claims misrepresent the field to the wider public. No, they represent it accurately to the wider public. That's why you're upset.
Yep.
Jeez Louise. Okay. It is unfair to use guilt by association. Many fine studies are cited on creationist websites.
Oh, just like what we're doing today.
Yeah, exactly. We're reading you. I'm sure
this is a fine. By the way, this is a fine study.
It is a very fine study. Yes, I mean, other than the periodic ad hominem you throw at your opponents, a field that urgently needs reform is a field in quote crisis when it fails to reform. This lends credibility to the claims that scientists are at best hidebound and foolish, and at worst guilty of ideologically motivated deception. I don't think most creationists say either of those things.
Well, I mean, he shouldn't be saying scientists. He should say evolutionary biologists. That's more accurate.
Yeah, he's equivocating. He's basically slipped evolutionary biologists into scientists as a whole to avoid the actual problem, which is most creationists don't like. We love science. We're sitting here nerding out a science paper for 2 hours. I mean,
yes, and we're graduate students in science.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actively getting my degree. You've got multiple science degrees, so
yeah,
I wouldn't be doing this because I hate science.
Yeah, so that's a slip. That was equivocation and conflating.
Yeah, it's anyway. Such claims find an eager audience among those who reject the scientific consensus on other grounds. Oh, that almighty appeal to consensus. Like consensus has never been wrong. Let's talk about geocentricity again, shall we?
Yes.
Anyway, for example, Fodor and some other gentleman who I can't pronounce his name present a priori objections to, quote, to parentheses, their version of natural selection, but also include a fairly typical laundry list to add some empirical heft. Choros criticized Nagel for not including a laundry list. Second, and within the field, the claims encourage neophilia.
What's that?
I'm assuming afraid of the new, because neo is new, philia is fear of, so...
No, philia is love.
No, philia is... okay, love of the new. Maybe I... Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I have that backwards. So maybe love of the new? Maybe? I don't know. That's a word I'm not familiar with. This makes us unwilling to build on previous work, to integrate new findings and ideas with existing explanatory frameworks, and to replicate published results, or to solve the field's many outstanding problems. So yeah, I think it is love of the new, just and a love of, because the way that context is, it sounds like he's talking about people are just all want to do new stuff all the time. They don't want to build on the old stuff. But new stuff is how you get published. So I don't necessarily fault people for that, because if you're not publishing new, you're not getting published. Replication studies almost never get published when people do them, because journals don't want to publish that.
Or retraction studies.
Retraction studies. Yeah, okay. Good luck with that one. It also distracts attention from the ways in which all biologists do something genuinely new, such as expanding the range of study of organisms. This comparative method, Krog's principle, and our ignorance of biodiversity all suggest that this is one way we might usefully extend the field. And he closes with that. And then there's a bunch of footnotes where he's gone and explained some stuff that he said in the paper. And then he goes into the reference section. I'm very curious. What has Dr. Welch published on? What's his CV?
I looked up a John J. Welch, and I'm not 100% sure it is him. But there is a John J. Welch at Cambridge.
That's this guy.
It says, my core research focuses on the causes of molecular evolution, the processes which shape DNA sequence variation within and between populations. His keywords, let's see what else he says here. There was something.
Yeah, his primary publications, like Springer was kind enough to allow me to view his publications. So he's published 7 articles and 1 book chapter through them, 4 in the life sciences, 2 in biomedicine, 1 in medicine and public health, and this article in philosophy, mostly in evolutionary biology and entomology. That's where he goes. through Springer, it doesn't look like he's published a lot. He did an article on Wolbachia butterflies, an article on Anopheles mosquitoes, some biomarkers and stuff. Oh, here's an article. Oh, hang on. Divergence and polymorphism under the nearly neutral theory of molecular evolution. That's a 2008 paper. That one would be something that would be probably a little more relevant. Correlates of substitution rate variation in mammalian protein coding sequences. That's another one he did. And the influence of body size and net diversification rate on molecular evolution during the radiation of animal phyla. So this guy is very heavily into evolutionary biology, which explains why he's so eager to defend the field.
He's very accomplished, by the way. I mean,
oh, it doesn't surprise me. Teach at Cambridge, you got to be.
I mean, this is, you know what? This is a gem of a paper.
It is
by a really top expert in the field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy knows his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just like, the things he was citing, I'm just like the amount of literature he had to digest to find all this.
Yep. He's read heavily, which is always a good thing.
Oh goodness, I don't know how I mean, the guy must have been just look at the reference list.
I know the reference list is huge.
I mean, he must be just eating and breathing this stuff day and night.
Yeah, the reference list is monstrous.
Oh, there it is. J.J. Welch at Cambridge ACUK.
Yeah, he's a Cambridge guy. Yep.
Oh my goodness, Doctor, and I saw he may be he's a brilliant mind. I'm sorry to say this, kind of a waste, but still.
Yeah, they just, well, it's not a complete waste because we can take what he has written and draw from it, which we've done tonight over the last 2 hours. We've been at this for almost 2 hours at this point.
So this was, this was one of the great readings. It's perfect for
Question Evolution Day.
Yeah, Question Evolution Day.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, this was. Yeah, actually, there was. If the viewers saw me just going back and forth, it was because I was trying to pin down who this guy was, because he writes with such authority and knowledge, and just I don't think he's a small player. No, that's probably why he got away with a few things. Is he must be very respected.
Yeah,
that he could talk about these guys needing therapy.
Yeah, you don't get away with that if you're at the bottom rung of the ladder. You get away with that if you've got some seniority and people respect you and you got some clout.
Oh yeah, he's got serious clout that he could talk about these people as needing something therapeutic.
Yikes! Yeah.
I think we're going to refer to this paper not only just for the paper itself, but it has a great reference list.
Yes.
Where he explained all of these issues.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, so the reference list will be something I will be coming back to. So, Dr. Welch, I doubt you'll ever watch this, but thank you for writing this paper.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Welch.
We had a great time reading it, and your reference list is invaluable, sir. So thank you very much. Good job, old boy. Good job.
Yeah, good job, old boy.
to put it in an English accent. So,
well, we are at the end of this show, and Emory and I talked about the one thing we're going to do is we're going to advertise Dr. Tour's Valentine's Day gift. You could just see the love there. So we're just reminding the viewers that on Valentine's Day, Dr. Tour is going to apparently begin a series where he might be criticizing Professor Dave.
Yes, and if it goes as planned, it will be very entertaining.
And then there'll be an after show after Dr. Tour is done at 8 p.m. This show starts at 8 p.m. And then afterward, 9:30 p.m., I'm presuming this is Eastern time, there'll be an after show on Logical Plausible Probables YouTube channel. By the way, I'm going to try to put all these details in the video description. And Emory and I probably will drop in just to...
Yeah,
I'm pile on.
Yeah, Lord willing, I will definitely be at this particular after show, unless something comes up at the last second. I don't know about Sal, but I'm definitely planning on being there.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch. I'm at least gonna watch. This is gonna be fun. So, wow. So this has been an extraordinary. I didn't expect this paper to be that good.
Yeah,
I mean,
I read
thought it
the
would
abstract before I came on the air, and I thought, man, this guy's just going to be this is going to be a boring paper. We're not going to get very much out of this, which is why I skipped the abstract. And then I started going through. I'm like, oh my. Good night.
Yeah, I actually thought that we would have to skip a lot because I was presuming it was going to just be mostly boring. But there was hardly a section that wasn't exciting. There's hardly anything that was boring.
Yeah.
And maybe for some of the readers it was a little too technical, but hopefully you could tell by the way Emory and I were laughing that this was really good. Even if you don't understand why we were laughing, it was good. I mean,
yes, that was a fantastic paper. Fantastic. So.
If I were, this would be really funny if we had a creation evolution debate. I would just read this paper. Say, okay, if someone says, "Oh, evolution is such a great topic," and I'm just like, okay, why don't we read through this paper? So anyway, Emory, I really, you know what? You're a better reader than I. Your mind is, one thing I noticed, your mind is so quick. I have a slight speech impediment. I can't talk as fast as you. And you also read fast. So that's great.
It's a gift. Lord willing, I've been able to maintain it. So I've always loved to read. So,
well, I know that. Well, I remember you. So whatever your professional goals, if you do some teaching on the side, I would expect you to be a very engaging instructor because you can talk. You can keep the students engaged on the topic. They'll have to be very attentive because your mind moves very quickly, and I like lecturers who could talk way faster than I can. So thank you very much. I'll give you the last word.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I had a great 2 hours. I was not planning on spending 2 hours, but it was a great 2 hours. That paper is a gold mine. I will be citing it and using it in the future because it is just full of little gems. So thank you everybody for coming out and listening and watching. We had a great time, and hopefully you all enjoyed it as much as Sal and I did. So yeah, definitely, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. I had a great time. So
yes, and hopefully you all can tune into the after show, and Emory and I will be at Logical Probables after show on Sunday, February 14th. So take care, everyone, and God bless you.